Hello, Joanna. Thank you so much for coming onto the show. This is a very big deal for me, and I hope a very big deal for a lot of my listeners as well. So thanks for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me, Connor. I'm excited to be here.
Good, good, good. So we'll get stuck right in. I'd like maybe if you could tell us a little bit about you and growing up, siblings, family, what kind of home did you live in, that kind of a thing.
And I'm like, what kind of homes? This is a really odd
Well, I
question.
mean, yeah, because when I wrote it, I was like, that's a bit weird. But what I mean is like, was it a house that encouraged, creativity and stuff like that? Or was there a bit more rules and,
Yeah,
that
sure.
kind of, yeah.
And not the architecture.
No, well, was it a bungalow or a duplex,
Yes. But okay, well, my parents divorced when I was quite young, and I grew up mainly with my mum and my brother, and my dad went on to have another family. So I've got two brothers, two sisters. I'm the eldest of five, and I think it's not quite Irish size, but it's five is a decent. So our meetups now are pretty big.
Yeah.
Which I really love. And so yeah, growing up with my mum. So my mum was a career woman, so a very driven in business and sort of education. She was a teacher but went into consulting. So inevitably, I was encouraged from a young age to be an independent woman, to make my own money. My mum always used to say, you need to be your own knight in shining armor.
Oh,
So I definitely, I had a job as soon as I could. I think I was 13 when I started my first job
same.
at the week. Yeah, exactly. At the weekend. I don't think kids are allowed that anymore, but but no, certainly brought up very much to work hard, do well at exams, and I was always a geek. I know you like the word geek, and
Yeah.
I've always been I love studying and stuff like that. So yeah, so I guess it just encouraged to get educated, learn lots. We were on benefit for a while, and so the library was somewhere I would get a lot of my books. So I certainly love libraries. One of the reasons people can get all my books in libraries is because I really believe in that ecosystem. So yeah, and then my mum took us to live in Malawi in Central Africa when I was 8,
Okay.
and that really had a big impact on me and my brother, because we were living in an African country, and so that really sort of shaped the travel aspect of my
I was,
life. So
I was going to say,
yeah.
you can really see it started there, especially because you were so young.
Exactly. And I think that, both me and my brother and my mum have lived all over the world, and, have always thought globally, multiculturally. Amongst my 5 siblings, we're married to an incredible array of people from different cultures. And so I feel like that's what has shaped my life really, is, yeah, that upbringing of having a sort of multicultural, multinational family is really important.
And you mentioned the word like study and education and all that kind of thing. So when you were especially a younger kid, like 13 and younger, was creativity and the arts and stuff like that encouraged as well? Or was that kind of more you can do that in your spare time, get maths right first?
No, definitely not maths,
Okay.
because both my parents failed at maths. But it's interesting because, in fact, I had a tutor, and you'll understand this. You're a teacher, right? Not every teacher can connect with every child. That's just like, yeah, people think differently, and I could not understand maths at school. But my mum, again, at the time, she didn't have a lot of money, but she was like, it's just, you just need, you're a clever girl. You just need someone to teach you the right way. And I think this is really important. And we know a lot more now, but this was back in the 80s. I don't know, it wasn't so acceptable to think a bit differently. So I was always a more wordy person, but when I had a tutor who helped me with maths, I got it. And so I think about this a lot in terms of, people say, oh well, why do I need to put out my book in audio, or how do you read on an ebook? That's terrible, I love paper and stuff. And it's like, well, or why do you have a course or a podcast? Why don't
Yeah.
you just write it down? And it's like, well, people are different and people learn in different ways. So yeah, I think that was really important. My dad was always an artist, but because my mum was quite focused on us sort of making money, I did do artistic things, but it but I've always been a reader, but it was never something that was encouraged as a career choice. It was definitely not something that was on the pathway.
To be fair, I don't
But
think anybody encourages people to be a writer as a career because it's so hard to make a living as a writer.
well, not just that, even again, coming back to teachers, because you are one, I can't help mentioning things,
Okay.
but I did, I had my English teacher at school. I wrote one of my first stories that I wrote and submitted at school. So I probably would have been 12, was a short story about a nightmare that I had. It was actually about my parents and my siblings and having to make a choice, but it was actually really a horror. It was quite violent. And my teacher said, this isn't the type of story you should be writing. Like, you should be writing literature, like the stuff we study. And that did have an impact on me, because it took me, I think, 25 years to actually
Yeah.
write something with dark themes.
But then from the other side, from the teacher side, there has been times where students of mine have written a quite dark or violent or whatever story, and there is this, oh, what are they seeing, what are they thinking, what are they doing? Now I'd never discourage them, say you shouldn't be writing this kind of thing, but I'd always like slip a photocopy of it to a parent and be like, just so you know, something like that. Because it can be quite jarring when a young kid writes something dark.
Mm, yeah, absolutely. I just think it's interesting to think that our teachers do have a big impact on us, and that what I like now is that it does seem much more acceptable to write different things, like all the kids who like the R.L. Stein, Goosebumps stuff, and most of us who love Stephen King found him in teenage darkness.
Yeah. Definitely. So you mentioned libraries and how much of an effect they had on you. Like, were you always a big reader, or was it something that kind of came gradually, or was it just you were always into reading and books and stories?
No, I was always a reader. And my mum has she said, when I used to come into her bedroom in the middle of the night, like when I was even like 4 years old, I wouldn't have teddies, I would have books with me.
Oh,
And I'd crawl into bed holding books because they were my favorite things. So yeah, I've always, and all the pictures, back in the 80s, pictures of children are very rare. Like, there's the occasional photo, because most of the photos were terrible. So, and all the photos my mum has of me are me sort of holding books, which is hilarious because some of them are so inappropriate. Like Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance when I was about 9. But I know I've always loved reading, and I mean, still I read like all the time. It's it's
yeah,
what I love
you're
doing.
a very voracious reader, because I've heard you talk
Mm.
about like, oh, and I read these 2, 3 books this week.
Yesterday.
Yeah, or even yesterday. Whereas I'm like I'm very strange as a writer because I'm a very slow reader. I think it's just because I have so many things going on in my head. I can concentrate on a chapter or 2 or 3, and then I'm like, okay, now to the other hobby. But it's still, you still need to read a lot to be a good writer, I think.
Yeah, but I think I also have a certain type of personality where I read very fast, but I'm scanning for information that's useful and things that are useful to my audience. And so it's part of my job now, which I love. I'm kind of a commentator on publishing, and I'm a self-help addict, and I love my various series. So I think, and people listening as well, like, you don't compare yourself to other people. It's about what's best for you. And you're right, as a writer, you do have to read, but the speed of that I don't think is important.
Yeah, no, thank you for assuaging my fears of being a slow reader. um, so you were definitely like, I mean, how could you not have been a studious person in school with your mom kind of pushing you in, your love of books and everything? But the degrees that you went for are very interesting, because you would think, because of where you are now in your career and everything, that you would have gone for something in writing or publishing, but you didn't. So could you tell me a bit about why you chose those particular degrees? Even tell the listeners what they are.
Yeah, sure. Well, it is funny because basically I did a lot of charity work in my teens, when you're into Amnesty International when you're 16 and stuff. And I did a lot of charity work out in the Middle East. So I worked out in whether you want to call it the West Bank of Israel, Palestine, whatever you would like to call it, the occupied territories. I worked there several times, and so I actually got into Oxford University to do Arabic, because my plan was to become, this was back when Boutros Ghali was the UN Secretary General, and I was like, do you know what, I'm going to be Boutros Ghali. That was always my goal. And solve Middle Eastern peace. That was that
Wow.
was what I know. I was very ambitious as a
Yeah.
teenager. So I thought this would be, so anyway, the plan was to go to Oxford, do Arabic, join the civil service, and then start working in the Middle East. And it was absolutely classic, because I got to Oxford on day one and went into the room and realized that everyone else in the room could already speak Arabic. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna fail. So I went to my college, because at the time my mom had left, was living in America and all of this stuff. And so I was like, I went to my college and said, what else do you have? I don't want to leave. Do you have anything else that I could do? And at the time I was a Christian, and I also had A level in classics, and I could read and write ancient Greek,
Oh,
which is
really?
yeah, again, one of those really random things. I did a Greek GCSE, ancient Greek GCSE, and
Can you
so they
still
said, "Oh, sorry."
can you still write and read ancient Greek, or is it kind of?
I can read it, like I can read the alphabet, and I still know some of the words. But basically, they said, well, look, if you do theology, then you could do the Bible in Greek. So I was like, sounds good. So I started doing theology, and it's so funny because I lost my Christian faith soon after, due to many reasons. But I love theology because it's lots of study, it's languages, it's law, it's history, it's religion, it's philosophy. And I specialized in the psychology of religion. And because I actually lost my taste for Middle Eastern peace when Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by a Jew, and he was the prime minister of Israel, and basically the Middle Eastern peace process at that point was over. So I was like, okay, this is a new direction. So yeah, I did a degree in theology because basically that's what was available. But it turned out to be absolutely fascinating. And most of my fiction still brings in a lot of my interest in that. And in fact, my second novel, Crypt of Bone, is about why people do things in the name of God. And that was based on my thesis from
Oh,
Oxford,
oh,
based on that assassination, essentially.
okay, that's really interesting. No, I've read some of the Arcane books, and yeah, I was going to say you can really see your background and also interest in different world faiths and faith systems, because even the books do branch away from Christianity. Like there's polytheistic religions in there and everything, so it's not just Christianity, it's
Oh
religion.
yeah, well my main character, Morgan Sierra, she was brought up in Israel. She's not Jewish. Her father was Jewish, but my husband's Jewish, and obviously I've been out to Israel 16 times. I worked out there a lot with both Jews and Palestinians, Israelis and Palestinians, and Christians, and all of the rest. And I love it. I think it's all fascinating. And whatever people believe, what's interesting is most people believe something. You write supernatural thrillers. I mean, even, there's something there that we are attracted to, whatever name you want to call it, basically. So even though I'm not a Christian or a Jew or any religion, I'm definitely someone who's interested in, I'm spiritual, let's call it that.
I was gonna say, yeah, it's I funny enough, for me personally, I kind of, like, as I grew up, I was brought up in a Christian house and a Catholic house, and I was very, very religious. And at one point as a young kid, I even was like, oh, I'd love to be a priest. I really want to be a priest. And there was two big things I discovered that really changed. One was, but a priest isn't allowed to have be married or have kids. I was like, oh no, that doesn't sound good. And then I can't, I can't remember what it was, but there was one little thing I read somewhere that wasn't allowed because of something said in the Bible. And that just flicked a switch, and I was like,
That was
okay,
it.
no, I'm full on atheist now. It's all nonsense. But I teach in, I think you'll find this interesting. I teach in a school in Ireland that's called an Educate Together school.
Hmm.
So instead of being a Catholic school or Protestant school or or a school of no faith. We're a school of all faiths. So
Hmm.
we celebrate Diwali, and then we'll celebrate Christmas, and then we'll celebrate Ramadan, and all
Oh
the
wow,
faiths.
your school sounds fun. You
Yeah,
celebrate everything.
yeah, we literally do everything. Like, it's non-stop celebrations. COVID put a cap on that, but other than that, it's non-stop. But it's really interesting because I can openly talk to the kids about being an atheist and not believing in anything, and they treat that with the same level of respect as they would people of their own religion, people of different religions. So it's all about kind of respect, no matter what you do or don't believe in, really.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, what is our fiction if it's not asking questions about the deep and meaningful stuff? And what I like about it is every single one of my books, I'm basically questioning the same thing about what is God? Does God exist with a big G or a little g, or whatever you want to say? And that's what's interesting. And hey, we're never going to know.
No. Seeing as I just mentioned kids there and everything, when you were a kid, was there any one book that, like, it's a very hard question to answer, but what's your favorite book as a child? But is there any book, maybe not so much favorite, but a book that really stuck with you and that really, I don't know, stayed with you as an adult?
I think, I mean, I really liked what used to be books for boys. So the Hardy Boys, I liked far more than whatever Nancy Drew or whatever. And one of the books I read early, again, this, libraries back in the 80s. So King Solomon's Mines by H. Rider Haggard, which I would say is a really old book now, or The Prisoner of Zenda. I really liked these sort of adventure books. And so the Hardy Boys, I guess, and Rider Haggard kind of took me to Wilbur Smith, and Wilbur Smith, definitely that sort of action adventure travel genre. That's kind of still where I write in. So yeah, but also it's funny because I was thinking back to that time, and the TV shows and films also, I was really trying to think, where were the female role models in the action adventure? There really weren't any. So James Bond, I really loved Live and Let Die, that again, early religious, with all the voodoo stuff. And I've written a voodoo book. Valley of Dry Bones is a voodoo book. And also the A Team, like I loved the A Team, and again, all guys.
Yeah, actually.
And I love explosion stuff. Like I would always love, like, when they put all the stuff in and then blow up a truck or whatever. And maybe they should redo the A Team with like more of a mixed cast.
Yeah.
Because I definitely, and it's funny because I didn't think at the time, oh, there's no girls, why are there no girls? But now I find myself writing in a genre that still is very male dominated. And what I love is writing a female action adventure thriller, with lots of guys in and lots of people in, but I just think that shaped me early. And what was interesting is when I started writing, it was like, oh, I suddenly realized that perhaps these were missing. And what we had as girls was like Mallory Towers, that sort of boarding school
Yeah.
stuff. And I'm like, no
They're
way.
making a comeback at the minute, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they've been recently, because I'm in surprise, surprise, I'm in charge of the library in my school.
Oh, right.
And they're re-releasing them with new kind of more up-to-date covers. But what's really interesting is I don't know who the author is, but they're actually getting somebody to continue the series on.
Oh, no, they were always a ghostwriter, always.
Were they?
Yes, and the Hardy Boys and all those books, they were the name of the writer was never a real person. They were all publisher owned,
Was Mallory Towers
ghostwritten.
not Enid Blyton?
Oh, maybe that was,
Yeah.
maybe it's the other ones I'm thinking of, the Nancy Drew. There was
Nancy.
one of them. Was it Nancy Drew? Was it? Yeah. But poor old Enid Blyton's getting washed with the oh dear, is this woke enough kind of thing. But Mallory Towers is a good example of, really, how are they re-releasing that? Can't they re-release the Hardy Boys with mixed cast?
Yeah, just alter a couple of things. Like it can't be very hard to just change one character's name and pronoun, and boom, now you have a more gender balanced thing. It's not
Gender balance thing.
Um,
The hardy people.
the Hardy Peeps. There's actually a Irish comedy series called The Hardy Bucks. So that's every time someone starts talking about, oh, there's this series, The Hardy, in my head, I'm like, books? No, no.
Yeah.
Right. um, so your first book that you wrote, let's start talking about you as a writer, was very telling, I think, in where your mindset was at the time. Could you tell us a bit about that, why you wrote your first nonfiction book?
Yeah, well, I was just miserable in my job. So the first book was called How to Enjoy Your Job or Find a New One, which I later rewrote as called Career Change, which is a much better title. But yeah, so basically I was miserable. I'd been an IT consultant for years. You know, out of Oxford, you tend to get recruited into the consulting firms and paid well. And, you know, it was all marvelous, but my life was quite empty. And so I got to sort of the point of, you know, having a house and a mortgage and investments and stuff. And I was like, I'm so miserable. Well, this can't be life. You know, I was sort of early 30s and didn't really know. So then I was like, well, I love reading self-help. I love Tony Robbins. I'm going to write myself a self-help book. And so I did loads of study and I wrote this book. And then once I'd written it, I was like, right, I'm going to find a publisher. I'm going to change the world. Yeah, that didn't happen. But the book, in writing that book, I learned how to write a book.
Yeah.
And this was sort of 2006 to 2008, which was when ebooks, global publishing, you know, print on demand started to happen. And as a businesswoman, I was like, I could just put this out myself. And so that's kind of what started my career in writing books and publishing. I was living in Australia, and the what I discovered about publishing was that it was going to take a couple of years
Mm.
before the book could even be on the shelf, even if I got an agent and a publisher, and I just was not going to wait that long. So that's kind of why I made that decision. But yeah, and it's funny because it didn't turn out the way I expected at all. But I think that's the message for people, which is just go with it. Don't obsess too much about what might happen with that first book. Yeah, everyone thinks they're going to become a millionaire with their first book, but you probably won't.
Yeah.
So maybe just get that one out your system and then you can move on to some other things.
You said one thing I think is very interesting, and a question just popped up. So, with self-publishing, indie publishing, however you want to call it, you can get a book out there fairly quick. Now, if you're too quick, it's probably not going to be a polished book, but you're in charge of the timeline. And with traditional publishing, it can take a year, two, sometimes even three, depending on the book. So, with a non-fiction book, do you think there's a risk that if going the traditional route, that by the time it's ready to go out, that it's a bit dated and maybe needs another rewrite? Or is that just me not understanding?
It totally depends on
Mm.
the book and the publisher. I mean, look, there were pandemic books out within a month of us all, of WHO saying this is a pandemic. And so when they want to, they can be very fast. But you know, and if someone's famous, for example, you see someone hitting like Marcus Rashford, the footballer, they had a book out on him within minutes when
Yeah.
he hit the news here in the UK. And I think it's Marcus Rashford, lovely footballing guy anyway. But this is the thing, it's not, it's more like, yeah, sure, if you write a self-help book that's more evergreen, then that will take some time. What people have got to remember with publishing is like a conveyor belt, and you get your slot on the conveyor belt, and where your slot is will depend on lots and lots of things.
Mm.
Whereas with and there's lots of other people on the conveyor belt, whereas when you're in charge of your own career, when you're an independent, when you run your own business, you're the only one on the conveyor belt.
Yeah.
So you can be like, okay, I'm going to move this up or move this back or come up with something else. And so yeah, but again, it's a personality thing. It's like we were saying with the reading. I don't believe there's one way for everyone or every book. Like, you have to make your choices, but they need to be educated choices. And that's kind of why I do some of what I do, because I feel like people need to understand their choices and be empowered, and then yeah, go ahead, do what you like, but know what you're doing.
I think you said something very revealing about yourself. You're saying you want people to be educated and empowered. And that's
Mm.
kind of what you do, really. Like, I mean, half of your business as a full-time author is fiction, but the other half is nonfiction. And that nonfiction is for your fellow authors for the most part.
Mm.
Um, was that a conscious decision? Like, did you go into nonfiction for authors because you wanted to help, or was it more because you wrote one nonfiction book for authors and it kind of worked, so you did another one? Like,
Yeah, well, to be honest, I've literally just written and podcasted and blogged as I've gone along and learnt things.
mm,
So I started the creativepenn.com because I got ripped off um, in that first year in 2008 by one of these compilation scams where they charge you like
yeah,
$5,000 to put one chapter in a compilation book with some big name. And that's, you think, oh, that will kick me off
yeah,
into the world. These scams are still around all the time, but I didn't know any better. And I also paid to print 2,000 books and put them in and thought I could sell them. And again, I didn't. And then I discovered print on demand. I did things like press releases and got on TV and didn't sell any books. And so I was like, I'm learning all these things. Why is someone else not telling authors about this? And they weren't. So this was 2008. There was barely anyone talking about being an indie author back then. So I was like, I'm just going to start sharing this stuff. And I also had no author friends. I was very lonely. And so I started a podcast in 2009 so I could talk to people, which is one of the, yeah, exactly. And it
yeah,
still works. um, it still works as a way to talk to people, right?
yeah,
Because if you had just emailed me and said, hey, can you just reply to these questions by text? I would have said, no, thank you. But, a chat, after in my hour of drinking before dinner is fine with me. And so it's yeah, I think I didn't start with some grand plan to be where I am over a decade later. It just, as you take steps forward, things emerge. Also, what happened, nothing really happened for a couple of years, but what happened around 2015, self-publishing went mainstream. Before then it was very much not. It was considered to be a terrible thing, and then it went mainstream, and then my website started, like, the traffic just jumped really high, and it started to become more of a business. And so, but all I really do is write books as I learn things and want to share them. So I wrote a really big book on audio for authors, podcasting and audiobooks and voice technologies. And to be honest, that book doesn't sell loads because it's a niche within a niche.
yeah, it really is.
It's a super, super small niche. But everything I've learned over a decade of doing audio is in that book.
Mm.
And it was my brother, actually, one of my brothers started a podcast, and he was like, he literally messaged me on WhatsApp, can you tell me how to do a podcast? And I was like, oh my goodness, if only I had a book. And so I wrote that book. So he got about 30,000 words in the end. The whole book is about 70,000 words. It's a big book, that one.
Oh, that is big.
Yeah, exactly. And then he stopped doing his podcast anyway. But hopefully other people will find it useful. But yeah, I just tend to write what I'm interested in and what might be useful.
Can I ask a cheeky question?
Yeah,
Are you the overachiever of the family? Because he sends you a WhatsApp and you send him back a book.
it was about 6 months later.
Oh,
Well, I think we all have different strengths again. They say in birth order and all these types of things. I was the more academic one at the time, but now the brother I mainly grew up with has more degrees than me, but he's also, like a capoeira master, and he's a photographer, and so he's a super arty physical type. And I think that's the other thing, we all find our niche in, like, you're finding a niche with your podcast. I have a niche with my podcasts. I have two now. I have
yeah.
books and travel as well, and that's, if you don't have a niche, the same with writing books or whatever you do, you have to find a niche that is not completely saturated and put your own voice out there and see what happens.
It can be really hard though to do that, because I think a lot of people, like, like myself that are trying to get into this indie authorship and podcasting content creation, that it's hard to know how niche to go. And I think the general advice is you can't go niche enough, because if you just do a cooking podcast, that's a bit okay, everyone has that. But if you have a podcast that's about cooking for people who don't know how to cook yet, that's a bit better. And if you do something that's cooking for people that don't know how to cook yet and want something like one recipe per episode that's very easy to do, that's kind of what you want to do.
But I think that's format. The other thing you have to think about is just who you are as a person. So,
True.
I'm a Gen X, white British female, um, and that I have certain things that attract certain people. And what's lovely about podcasting, I mean, like, you have a lovely voice and people love listening to the Irish accent. They do. They're like, people love it. I love
And it's
it.
something Irish people don't understand why. Like we hear
No.
this all the time. We're like, but why?
Exactly, but it's so funny because I have an Irish friend and she's like, I'm not going to do audio. People, well, obviously, I'm sure you get it. Some people will say, I can't understand your accent. Like you, I'm sure you will get that occasionally. I don't get that comment, obviously, because I have quite like a polished British accent that people have been listening to on the BBC for blooming years.
Yeah.
But the thing is, if people want to listen to an Irish male voice, they're going to come to you, and all the things that make you you are also the important thing. And this is a tip for a podcast, just so you know. You need to be, people come for you. Some of them have come here for me, but most of them come for you. And the tip is basically that podcasting or books is that people come to spend time with the person who is the main person. So whether it's a main person in a character series, in a fiction thing, or on a podcast, it's the host. So you have to inject as much of you into your product as possible. Like people who talk about Catholics, I write a lot about religious relics. Like I love religious relics, like pieces of bone and blood and gold objects and put in shrines and stuff. I love all that. I put these, like right now I'm writing Tomb of Relics. I mean, it's basically so if you like religious relics, you can an action adventure, then you like my books. Again, it's a tiny subset, but it's very me. So I think that's important. I don't think it's so much that it's like gluten-free cooking show for kids or whatever. I think you can have a cooking show, but with some emphasis. I think the main thing, one of the things I've learned over these years is that you're going to change. You personally are going to change, and if you won't want to do the same thing in a decade, and the only way to keep some of your audience is by being you and helping and just doing your thing, and the audience will stay or they won't. It's what you have to do.
No, yeah, it's a really, really good point. And I think that's one thing, because to speak on your podcast, I mean, the Creative Pen website is like 13, 14 years old, and then the podcast is a bit younger, isn't it? It's something like that.
2008 I started the Creative Pen website. In 2009 I started the podcast.
Okay, so that's a while.
Yeah. Super old.
And it has changed. I mean, I've been listening to your show since like 2014 or something like that. And
thank you.
Not at all. It's a really good show if you want to be an indie author. But like I can hear the differences. I mean, now you do a futurist segment, and like at the start, I was like, why is she doing that? This doesn't make sense. But now it's one of my more favorite bits of it, because it's different. So what has it been like having a podcast go for like to be a teenager?
Well, I have thought about giving up so many times. And in fact, the futurist thing, I haven't talked about this very much, but I actually built a whole new website at Christmas. And I was going to move everything and start a third podcast on the
Because you don't
purely
have enough
future.
to do.
Exactly. Well, that's what I decided in the end, because the thing is, I do cover, if you're someone who's never written a novel before, you can find stuff on writing a novel or characters or the writing craft. And then I've got all the indie publishing and marketing and business stuff. And now I've got this future angle, and I'm talking about AI. And in fact, I've got right next to me 15 pages of the next big update I'm going to do, things like the spatial web and like all kinds of stuff, and most people don't want to hear it, to be honest, but I've decided that it's the I have to, my enthusiasm for things is what keeps people like yourself coming back. You don't want to hear, you would have left years ago if I was saying the same things every week.
Right.
And if, as a podcaster, the people who've left the podcasting space in the author niche are because they got bored.
Yeah.
And basically, if you do the same repetitive thing every week, you're going to get bored. So you have to that's what I was saying. You have to grow into your creativity, and you just have to trust that, sure, I mean, the episodes I do on AI, for example, I get about a third of the listenership. But
Okay.
then I do one on writing great characters and everyone comes back again. So, you have to keep moving forward in your own creative life and just trust that some people will come. And so that's kind of where I am now, is instead of stopping, like, I started a Patreon, obviously around 2014, actually, which was the first time I was going to give it up, because the time and the money it was taking were a lot. So I was like, well, I have to monetize this. So those are some of the decisions you have to make when you do things for the long term. It's like, okay, yeah, I'll do this for love, but it's getting really expensive, so I need to cover those costs. And now I feel like, also, if I'd have given up podcasting in 2014, 2015, that's actually when podcasting became a thing.
Yeah.
So this is something I've learned about myself, because I'm often very early on things. By the time I'm bored of something, it's about to go mainstream.
That's what you need to start doing. You need to have a "I just got bored of this" segment, because then people will know, oh, it's about to go mainstream.
Well, it's funny because I'm like, I'm really bored of talking about audiobooks, after I finish that. And then it's like, audiobooks are really
Yeah.
taking off now in the pandemic. So yeah, I think, but a lot of this stuff you can't necessarily plan. I mean, who knows? You just have to trust a lot of your instincts, and some of it will go wrong, obviously. I've written lots of books and some of them just don't sell at all. But again, such is life.
What can you do? Do you know what your number is? How many books now have your name as an author?
What on the, well, see, this is a really
Well,
tough question.
that's right, because you've three pen names, kind of, because you
Well,
share.
I helped my mum write some, but I don't claim those anymore. I think I have like 32 books under my name, but like How to Market a Book is on its third edition. How to Make a Living with Your Writing is on its second edition. I've got several. Non-fiction's a pain because you have to redo these editions. I also have several books that I wrote, published, and withdrew. And so I think this is one of those questions. This is why if you ask anyone who's written like over 20 books, they will have this answer of, not
Well,
really sure.
yeah, yeah. And then, like, do you count novellas or not? And do you count something that was in an anthology or not? And
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. All the short stories and blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
We're nearly out of time already. So I have these four questions that I ask every guest, because I love the huge difference I get in answers. So my first one is, when this interview is over and we've stopped recording and say goodbye, good luck, whatever, what's the first thing you're going to do?
Go make dinner.
Same.
That's to do with the time that you're recording.
It
So
is.
it's not very original.
No, 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 no. But I've recorded those, like, the pain of being someone that podcasts and interviews people from all around the world, the like time zones and scheduling and stuff. So usually it's like, I'm gonna make breakfast, and sometimes it's, I'm gonna go to bed. So I do get differences. The next one is, and this is a big one, I think, for someone with your kind of career. What are your goals now as an author going forward?
I want to be, I'm an award-winning entrepreneur and award-winning podcaster. I'm an award-nominated fiction writer, and I would like to win an award. JF Penn, my fiction name, I would like to be an award-winning fiction author. That's my goal. And that's one of those goals that's very hard to achieve, because you cannot control that. You literally just have to write books, submit them to things, and see what happens. And I have some very specific prizes in mind, so it's not just random award. It has to be something good. So yeah, that's a goal, but it's a long career goal. I see that.
Oh, definitely, because I think if you start with that, it's going to be a bad time.
Yeah.
Work towards that. Um, next one is, do you have any goals that are not to do with reading and podcasting?
Well, I guess technically that one wasn't.
Sorry, writing and podcasting. Sorry, I meant to say writing and podcasting.
Yeah, I have loads of. I'm a very goal type person. I do a lot of ultra marathons, but I'm doing. In fact, I should be a Catholic. I'd be a great Catholic, but I'm doing the Camino de Santiago next year, which is a
Oh,
Catholic
yeah.
pilgrimage across northern Spain, which is about 40 days
Hmm.
of walking, and that's been. I've thought about doing it for about 30 years, and during the pandemic, I was like, if I died of COVID right now, this would be the one thing that I would be angry with myself that I have not achieved. And that is to walk the Camino. So I will be doing that next year, and I will be writing a book about it.
Wouldn't be like you.
Exactly.
um, finally, where can everybody find you when if they're like enamored with your fine self and want to find you if they don't already know you? Where is the quickest place to find you online?
Sure. Since this is a podcast, you can come over to the Creative Pen podcast if you want to hear about writing and publishing and all that and future stuff. And if you like books and travel, come along to my books and travel podcast, which all of the things on all of the sites. But my main website is The Creative Pen with a double N. And yeah, that's where you find me.
Perfect. And my very final question, what was the last book you read? You probably
Oh, yeah.
started it and finished it today.
I have just finished one,
Oh,
The North Face of the Heart by Dolores Redondo, who is a fantastic Basque writer, again from the north of Spain,
mhm.
and she's brilliant. This is a series in translation, so I've been waiting for this book for years while they've been translating it. So yeah, Dolores Redondo, I love her books, and I think you'd like them. They're very supernatural.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, check her out. So there you go. There's my recommendation.
Joanna, thank you so much for doing this. It's been a podcast highlight for me so far. So this has been great. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for having me.